Hi everyone, welcome to episode 81 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. This is going to be a very interesting episode because it's a live interview I did with a former consular officer who's practicing immigration law now. It's actually an immigration attorney turned consular officer returned back to becoming an immigration attorney. His name is Christopher Richardson. The interesting thing is the interview was done live while he was visiting here in Los Angeles, so you can watch our in-person interview on the YouTube channel, Immigration Lawyers channel. And as always, you could hear it on iTunes and various podcast channels. And you can see back episode on the immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com as well. One note about the discussion, I did mention something in previous podcasts and this one about the issue of public charge determinations, especially at the Ciudad Juarez embassy, where if that's denied, it leads to the I-601A waiver being denied as well. This was in reference to a Department of State and AILA liaison committee meeting on October 18, 2018. And this is a really good series of notes to review. It's on the AILA website, and I have a link to the travel.state.gov website in the show notes of this episode. But some important things to remember is that if there's some documentation missing, the officer could issue a 221G, an INA 221G notice requesting what's missing, but if they feel like you are not able to sufficiently meet the affidavit support requirements, then they issue an INA 212A4 denial. Now, if it's an INA 221G refusal, then it doesn't mean the I-601A is automatically revoked. You have the opportunity to bring more documentation. But the Department of State does say that, in contrast, and this is quote, an affidavit of support that does not satisfy the consular officer that the applicant has sufficient financial resources, even after any possible joint sponsors have submitted an affidavit of support, that would lead to result in a refusal under INA 212A4, which is potentially going to lead to the denial of the waiver. In that same discussion with the AILA liaisons, they say that there's no requirement that the joint sponsor be a friend, and it could be any third party that's not necessarily financially connected to the sponsor's household. So if there was a denial for the reason that the joint sponsor is not a relative or something like that, and if you're able to prove that the officer based it on that denial and they wrote a report on it, or you have some information, that's something to contact LegalNet about, or the embassy to try to clear up, or your congressperson or senators, or all of the above. But without further ado, let's get it started. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I'm here with Christopher Richardson. It's a very special podcast because Christopher's an attorney turned consular officer and then back again to private practice, and he's here to share some information. I'm going to keep it conversational. We're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that people typically like to talk about with regards to consular processing, and also about his practice and how he got involved, the typical kind of podcast stuff. Without further ado, I'm going to get started. So Christopher, why don't you start telling me about yourself? Where did you grow up and how did you get involved in law?
Sure. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. I went to Emory for undergrad in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I went to law school at Duke in North Carolina. And then I practiced immigration law and employment and immigration law at a firm called Kilpatrick Stockton in North Carolina. And then another firm called Alston & Bird in Atlanta. And around that time, I wanted to try something different in my life and try something new. I had studied abroad while at Duke Law. And so I thought that, I wanted to see the world.
Where did you study abroad?
In Hong Kong. I was in
Hong
Kong for 9 months.
Did you have to learn Cantonese and
stuff? No.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, but I decided that I wanted to see the world, and so I took the Foreign Service exam and passed through it. It took me a good 2 years to get through everything. And
how many years were you practicing before you went to...
4 years.
Okay.
About 3-4 years I was practicing immigration law before I joined the Foreign Service as a consular officer. And then my first tour was in Nigeria for 2 years, then Nicaragua for 2 years, Pakistan for 1 year, and then Spain for 2 years.
And then were you in NIV or IV sections or kind of both split?
I was, for those who know about the Foreign Service, I was what was called Consular Cone, which is my specialty was consular work. And so in Nigeria, for example, I had done both NIV, non-immigrant visa, immigrant visas, and American Citizen Services, and a little bit of fraud. In Nicaragua, I was the chief of the immigrant visa section. I did a little bit of NIV and American Citizen Services. In Pakistan, it was the same thing, IV, NIV, and ACS. And in Spain, I did a little bit of everything.
I didn't realize you were the chief of the immigrant visa section in Nicaragua. So
yeah,
that's there's a lot of drama in that.
Yeah, nowadays, yeah. Now, back when I was there, it was a much more peaceful place. And the thing about being like a former attorney, immigration attorney, and then turning into a consular officer is that you have such sympathy for both the applicants and the attorneys that, you know, when you can make yourself available to help people, you do that. And so when I was a consular officer, I really tried my best to be as helpful as possible.
How did other consular officers take it that you were an immigration attorney? Because I've read and I've seen comments by consular officers that like, oh, attorneys are idiots, or like they don't know what they're talking about and kind of frustrated. Did that come off towards you, or is it just not, it's just some people thought, some people didn't think like that?
No, I think that among consular officers, so I think that there's a dichotomy here where immigration attorneys treat consular the way they treat USCIS. And they think that, well, USCIS likes a lot of paper, likes a lot of legal documents and legal arguments. Well, maybe not as much anymore, but consular officers don't like that stuff. And so, you know, I think a lot of people go in sort of yelling and screaming at the consular, not realizing that there's this thing called consular non-reviewability, and consular officers just don't care about a lot of that stuff. And so a lot of the things that work with USCIS really aren't going to work with consular officers. And so for a lot of consular officers, there's a lot of talk among consular officers, like, oh God, this immigration attorney, what are they trying to do? Like, why are these guys trying to write us these letters? We don't care about this stuff. And so, I think that, but within the state, for me, it was more like people would ask me, like, hey, what the heck's wrong with this consular officer? But I would often get asked questions as well about stuff.
So, okay, so, you know, having practiced, did you deal with consular processing that when you originally practiced, or were you more USCIS removal based? I mean, you did deployments, or you just USCIS?
I did both, actually. Even before the State Department. I mean, before the State Department, I did a lot of H-1Bs, a lot of Ls, both consular processing and
which administration was this under? How long ago was this?
When I was an immigration attorney. I was back during the Obama and Bush year.
Okay.
I was an immigration attorney in the late.
How was going into it? What was your perception of consular officers having? I mean, did you have bad situations ever with consular processing that had a certain jaded you at that point, or were you kind of like it was kind of better at that time? It wasn't as complex now?
I went into it thinking that these guys were like, I was like, wow, these guys know everything. They're on top of all their stuff. I used to write the most beautiful cover letters and support letters for my clients, and I was like, oh my God, this consular officer. I would spend so much time like focused on writing these documents, and so I had a really high opinion of consular officers, because I realized that, you know, to pass the Foreign Service exam and to go through that process took a lot of work, and so these people must be really, really smart and on top of their stuff. And then when I got into the State Department, it was a different. I have a different perception having worked in the State Department.
We'll get into that stuff more. So you private practice. It takes 2 years to get involved in consular processing. During those 2 years, could you practice law, or is it kind of you have to stop practicing immigration law because some sort of
No. I did. So, you know, basically with the Foreign Service, you take the exam. But you're basically just waiting for all of your clearances. You still work, you still do your whole life up until you get the final word that your last clearance is done.
When you say work with State Department?
No, I was still at my own law firm by then.
And did you ever have to recuse yourself from working on cases for your law firm? It was hard to even tell who the lawyer was or something.
No, because like you really don't. So I worked as the immigration attorney while taking the exam and doing all the process for it. But you don't like, you know, once you pass the exam, you don't have any special access or rights to consular. You know, you still have to go through the entire process. And then at the end, when they're like, finally, okay, now you can come, then you go to Washington, D.C., and then your past life is done. So I never had to recuse or do anything like that.
Interesting. So first place they sent you was to Nigeria. How did that, did you have a choice in that, or they just sent you over there?
No, generally when you first start, again, everyone picks what's called a cone. And so, like, if you're a diplomat, you pick an economics cone, political cone, public diplomacy cone, consular cone, or management cone. And those special cones, you basically, if you're a management officer, you manage the embassy. If you're an economics cone, those are the desires that you want.
Yeah.
But your first 4 years in the State Department, you have to do consular tour. So it doesn't matter if you're a political officer, or it doesn't matter if you're a PD officer, everyone has to do consular tours. And basically we go through something called an A100, which is basically our training classes in the beginning. And then we have 5 to 7 weeks of consular training. But before that, you basically put a list of countries. They give you a list of countries in the world. So there were like 99 of us in our class. There are about 99 jobs out there. And you basically like line up the jobs that you want. And unfortunately for me, I guess, well, not fortunately, actually was very fortunate. I didn't have any qualms about going to Nigeria, but my colleagues were all like, hell no, we'll never go to Lagos. And so, like, because I was the one who seemed to be the least resistant to going to Nigeria, that's how you end up in Nigeria.
Actually, the previous episodes of this, when I put this out, it was a Nigerian asylee that came and interviewed. He got his B1, B2 from Nigeria, came here, eventually declared asylum. But how did you like living in Lagos? How was it?
Every post I've been in, I've loved, and I've disliked to some extent. Actually, I love Nigeria because I think if you're going to be a consular officer, and we always say this among consular officers, Nigeria is the best place to start because every scenario, circumstance, and situation that you can imagine that goes on in the world is a microcosm at the embassy and the consulate in Lagos. And so security issues, SAOs, advisory opinions, H's, L's, like every type of visa and American citizen service issue you would find in Lagos. And so Lagos really prepared me for my subsequent tours because by having but been in Lagos and done visas in Lagos, given the amount of high fraud there, everything else is pretty easy after that.
Yeah. Interesting. So how is it being an American black person in Nigeria? And like, one is in the office when they're interviewing you, and would they be like prefer not to deal with you because they're afraid, or like want to deal with you? And second, just in the city when they find out you're American, because Africans have a different perspective of American black people. And so this is a highly offensive. I'm sorry, it's offensive.
No, it's fine. No, you don't have to actually. I think that when I was an officer, so in every country, when you're a consular officer, there are blogs that talk about the different officers in the embassy. And so when I was in Nigeria...
Blogs from regular people?
Yeah, regular people like in Nigeria, for
Interesting,
example,
I didn't know, I gotta check that out.
People in Ukraine have a blog about the officers, because people want to talk about the visa interview and give tips and pointers. And so among the blogs in Nigeria, one of them called Nairaland, I was known as the fake American because everyone was like, oh, he's really Nigerian, but he has like this fake American accent. That's what they would say is, oh, that guy's accent is so fake.
You look Nigerian, right?
Yeah, that's what they would say. I was like, no, I'm an American. My family's been in America for like 300 years. And so like the blogs would say that I was a fake American. But they would say that, oh, he's a nice guy, and because he's one of us, he's going to be nicer to us, quote unquote. But that wasn't the case at all. I think that a lot of us were, it made no difference at all. And so a lot of people would want to come to me thinking that I would be a lot more sympathetic than I actually would be. But in other posts I've been in, I've had people say that, well, they don't want the black officer, or people would not think I was an officer. They would think I was a local staff. A lot of times in Nigeria, I would do a visa interview and people would ask me, so when's the real interview going to be with the white officer? And I'd be like, no, your interview was with me. I've had to have bosses come out and tell people that they actually have to interview with me. When I was in Pakistan, there were people who didn't want to interview with me because I was black, and they thought, well, one person told me, well, you're black, you don't have any power in the embassy to give me a visa or not give me a visa. People are very blunt wherever in the world. And in fact, in every country I've been in, at least once on the line or once somewhere, someone's been like, oh, you aren't the real officer. And so that's something that I think is if you're a minority in a place, it's always going to be a tough thing as a consular officer.
And women and minorities, I was in the previous episode where I interviewed the gentleman who got asylum. When he entered, he claimed he requested at the airport, I want to do asylum, and they took him to detention. the first person who interviewed him was, and I read this in his book, was Chinese. And he's like, at the time I was so ignorant and racist, like, because the guy was Asian when he came. He's like, okay, he was just waiting for the actual officer to come. He's like, this is America, they wouldn't have an Asian guy come and do the initial. So he's like, oh, this is America, this stuff doesn't matter, okay, so how was life in Nigeria itself? Did you go out a lot, or kind of, as an American, it was kind of risky and stuff?
So, like, within the Foreign Service, if you're a diplomat in some of these countries, you have restrictions on where you can go. And so, in Lagos, you know, you have Victoria and Ikoyi Islands, and then on the mainland, you have the mainland of Lagos. So, as officers, we could only travel freely within the 2 islands. But if we want to go off the islands to the mainland, we would need like a bodyguard and permission and people with guns and everything else to go off of it. Lagos was it's a hard city, it's a hard place, but I loved it though, because it was so chaotically brilliant in so many ways. Everything is just sort of every man or woman for themselves. But the food is great, the music's great, the nightlife there was wonderful too. So I think that of my tours, I think I had the most fun in Lagos, as a visa officer as well, and as an ACS officer, American Citizen Services officer. I never laughed so much than in Lagos, just because of all the fraud and everything else.
The disproportionate income distribution in Nigeria is pretty insane. Like, you know, you got filthy rich people are connected, the oil and stuff. Would you notice that in the interviews that come in?
Yeah. And that's not just Nigeria. That was also true in Pakistan and in Nicaragua as well. Where you could definitely tell the wealthy people versus the quote unquote non-wealthy people or the poor people. It was clear the minute they walked in. For their visa interview. You could just sort of look at someone and tell at that point.
Interesting. Okay, so Nigeria, you were there for 2 years?
Yeah.
Tours are usually around 2 years? Is that how it works?
2 years are generally, the nice countries are 3 years, which is basically all the Western European countries, quote unquote nice countries. The most countries are 2 years, and then the really hard countries are 1 year.
And what is really Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya when it was open. I assume if they ever open Somalia again, it'll be 1 year. Cuba's 1 year.
Was Pakistan where you went to next?
Yeah. Well, I went to Nicaragua for 2 years, and then Pakistan.
Pakistan, I mean, it's chaotic, but it's a 1 year one, so it's because there are terrorism and stuff exists a lot there. Okay, so you went from Africa to South America, Nicaragua. And did you learn Spanish for that one? Okay. So.
And the way they do that is that they put you in Spanish language classes for 6 to 8 months to learn a language, basically. And then
is that while you're working, you're doing the language?
No, language is just like we have a school that they send all the diplomats to. There's a language school, and you basically learn the language full time.
That's all you do for 6 months?
That's all you do for 6 months,
How is that? I would love to do that.
You know, it's very, like, looking back on it now, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had done more languages and done more stuff. But then when you're actually in it, you're very, very stressed about it, because basically if you don't pass, you have to take like another 2-3 weeks of the language. So they don't let you leave until you pass like a certain proficiency in the language.
And it's pretty much you're making legal decisions, so like it has to be a fluency.
You have to be full. Well, not just so language school is not just for consular officers; it's for everyone, right? So not only do you have to be able to speak about the law in Spanish, but also the political situation or the economic situation or wherever you're going, because you never know whatever tour
essentially, if you're going to be on the news, you can speak the language and everyone understand. Were you ever interviewed in public? Is this were you an officer that wasn't going up?
In Nicaragua, yes. I did a lot of interviews for newspapers and the local news on, for example, the diversity lottery, anti-fraud interviews. So I've done interviews. I did interviews when I was in Nicaragua, when I was the IB chief, immigrant visa chief. They probably don't do too many more of those these days, but that's what I did.
So in Nicaragua, IB chief. So you're 2 years in Nigeria, and then you became IB chief. Is that a huge jump to go from forward to up, or how did
when I was in Nicaragua, when I was in Nigeria, I had been the deputy in IB chief and acting in IB chief for a while because my boss got sick, and that's like the largest post. One of the largest IB posts, largest NIB posts certainly in Africa at that time. And so like among consular officers, I mean, IB chief was more responsibility, but the NIB section was far bigger.
There's more numbers.
There's more numbers and more management of people in time. I think that of all the jobs I did, probably the IB chief in Nicaragua was my favorite. I think IB is probably my favorite, not just because I'm an immigration attorney, but also because when you're in the embassy, you have a lot more power and leeway to say yes in IV. That's something that actually a lot of consular officers don't like.
Yeah.
A lot of officers tend not to want to do IV because they don't like saying yes all that much. But me, I loved it. I was like, if I can make someone's day better, if I can make someone's life easier, when I was in Nicaragua, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like the consequences of finding a misrep when it's like a wobbler or this kind of stuff is like so intense and dramatic on people's lives. And you wonder as officers, like, when they make these decisions or they go admin processing and stuff, do they know that? I mean, sometimes admin processing is out of their hands, but it's like, do they feel the intensity of it, or?
You know, at the conference yesterday, we were talking a little bit about this. I was talking to my former colleagues about this. I think that for consular officers, you know, we have like 120 to 150 interviews per day. Most people don't realize that. That's why when people like write letters, I'm like, dude, don't write a letter, because consular officers don't have time to read letters. If you have to interview 150 people a day, you're not going to be able to read anything. But I think that in the numbers becomes the issue, because there's so much in terms of numbers that these decisions that you make on people's lives and the impact that it actually has on someone's life, it becomes almost diminished in the eyes of the consular officer, because they don't realize what they're doing and they don't realize who they're hurting sometimes, or even like who they're helping, because everyone's just a number to a consular officer in many ways.
I mean, I've had officers help clients, but it created problems later on at USCIS, because they're like, you shouldn't have got this visa, or they like this. An officer was trying to just help them get it through. I'm like, I wish they just went by the book the longer way. So
that happens as well. That happens a lot. So I've had that happen a couple times as an immigration attorney, where someone is like, you know, consular officer will do something, and I'm like, no, that's not what you should be doing. And, you know, I've asked the applicant even, hey, could you go back and tell the consular officer that that isn't what they're supposed to do? And the consular officer just waves them away. And, you know, who's the applicant going to listen to, right? They're going to listen to me, the former consular officer, or the current consular officer. And 9 times out of 10, those clients get in trouble because the consular officer jumped the gun on something.
I had a case where it was like a proxy marriage, and then they were going to get a student visa for the spouse was overseas, and I was reading the FAM. It's like you have to get a B2, come to the U.S. and then do change of status once you see each other. But the consular officer's like, you know what, I don't want to bother with that. Just give them an F2. But I'm like, now it's going to look like they lied about their marriage and stuff, and later on, and then the client, like, go back, and they're like, no, we got it. I'm like, no, you didn't get it. And they wouldn't listen to me, and they eventually came. As soon as they got here, they got divorced. And that's potential misstep that's going to follow them. I mean, we did apply for the tours at the beginning, but the problem with the DS-160 and DS-260 is there's not enough space to explain things. So, like, we said there was a spouse, but there's no place to say, okay, it's a spouse with proxy. Like, where do you fill that in?
No, that's supposed to be for the visa interview. And the reason why there isn't much space on it is because you have to realize that with officers, we don't read like a paper copy. Basically, a computer screen pops up, and the DS-260 pops up, and it goes from here to there, and you basically just have to scroll down.
Is it kind of like the review form that we, like the finalized form?
Right. Okay, and that's it. It's just like the finalized form. So all we do is we just scroll down, and basically as an officer, you're basically looking for, depending on if it's an NIV or IV, you're just looking for 3 or 4 certain points, and then that's it.
It's kind of like my questionnaires I always send to clients. It's just like some things I like spotted, like, okay, this is issues you got to watch out for.
Right.
So, okay, so Nicaragua, what kind of issues would come up in Nicaragua when you were there?
We had a lot of, this is back when the 601As were just rolling out. So we had a lot of people coming back into the country to do their visa interviews. And a lot of that stuff was so new back then that a lot of us didn't, I don't think we treated it as well as we should have. So yeah, we get a lot of those. A lot of H2As.
Did you consider not as the same thing as a 601 or like a lesser or like?
Well, no, just because remember, like people would get their 601A waiver, then leave the country, come back to the embassy just to interview like really quick. Some people had come back expecting only to wait like 2 or 3 days or whatever to get their visa, and then they find themselves having to wait 3 or 4 months while we try to get through all of our cases.
Wow.
And so we had to deal with a lot of 601A waivers, a lot of H2As, of course a lot of like gangs and tattoos and stuff like that.
You know, something that was brought up last night is the issue, and saw this with CDJ, is that when people got 601As and then went to interview in their public charge issues, they would go back and cancel the 601A. Now, there was a DOS liaison meeting with AILA, and they said that that's not the proper procedure. And so they said, no, they're not supposed to invalidate the 601A, and the whole issue of the I-864 not being appropriate, they challenged all that. I was surprised, and I wanted to get the word out about that the DOS memo had that. But did you see that happening when 601?
No, because you know that's more of a new thing. Really, after President Trump won, we saw a lot of cables basically come out about the public charge, and a lot of like hey, just as a reminder, there's this thing called the public charge, and we should probably be, I mean, to me, like, so I wrote an article for The Nation basically where I think the public charge is just like, I don't know, this was bullshit. You can just block that out or something. I think the whole concept of a public charge is just like ridiculous. I don't see why, like, if you're married, like for me personally, like, as an officer, I shouldn't be there determining whether, like, you're quote unquote wealthy enough or special enough. If you marry an American citizen and you want to bring them over, then, God bless you guys. I hope the best for you guys. I hope you make it work in whatever circumstance you do. And so I'm not a big fan of the public charge, and I was never a big fan of the public charge as an officer, just because I saw how basically a lot of officers used it as a mechanism to go after applicants that they necessarily couldn't because it was an IV interview. And so a lot of officers were like, wow, shit, I can't really, like, revoke this, but I can use the public charge to make this person's life a living hell.
Yeah, because I've been hearing people, they have joint sponsors and they say, oh, you have to be a relative. Like, what's the
that's not even a requirement. That's not even a requirement. But basically, when I was in state, like, because this cable came out, which, our internal communications and memoranda came out, talking about the public charge, Civil War has basically used that as, like, they were using that as their go-to to basically go after people and cancel their 601As. State Department, they believe that it does cancel the 601A, but obviously DHS is...
You gotta double check on making that. That was DOS amendment. Yeah, I gotta double check that. That's what I was saying about. I read it a couple times. I was amazed because this is a big issue that was on the listservs. Actually, you keep mentioning cables. I just remember WikiLeaks had this cable disclosure, and all the juicy stuff in the news is about, like, politics and stuff like that. But I'm like, wait, is there immigration cables in there?
Oh yeah, we always write immigration cables. There's a lot of
that's a lot of knowledge right there you can get. I'm not sure if we're allowed to be to do so. I'm not sure the rules were, but that'd be something interesting. So that's awesome. So you were Nicaragua, then you switched up and you went to Pakistan at that point. So you're going back. Is Nicaragua considered a medium, like a on the level of, like, the scary ones and the good ones and stuff? Where's Nicaragua in there?
Nicaragua is generally considered like one of the medium ones, but I personally love the country. I thought it was a beautiful place, very relaxed. Some of the cases, especially American Citizen Services cases, were incredibly tough. But
what was like tough about
them? The thing about American Citizen Services officer is that anything that deals with an American citizen in a country, you have to deal with. So it's not just, hey, passports or cribbas. It's like, this American's been murdered, this American has been raped, sexually assaulted, this American is in jail. So you're going to have to be the one to go to the jail as the consular officer. You're going to have to be the one to go to the morgue to identify bodies. You're going to have to be the one to basically help someone try to escape from the country. When I was in Nigeria, and I was the ACS chief at that time, there was a plane crash. And so there were about 200 people on that plane, of which 13 were Americans. I had to go to the morgue and watch as they brought up body after body and try to identify them, based on, like, their, passport application, and going through their wallets and trying to find, like, identification of people that they suspected were American citizens. And so, I think that ACS is probably one of the most untalked about, but the hardest part of being a consular
that's a whole
officer.
Aspect I didn't even think about. Because I thought it's like, consular birth abroad, and it's just like a side thing. That's intense.
Only if, only if it was just like the consular birth abroad and passport issues. But no, like, it's literally like you're issuing a passport one day, 1 minute, and then you're going to go out to the jail to visit someone in jail for whatever.
That's the stuff when they say if you're a U.S. citizen abroad, something happens, contact the embassy. That's the person.
I'm the one that'll go visit you in jail. And sometimes we can do stuff about it, but sometimes you're in jail because the government wants to punish America, and so you're sort of a pawn. And I saw a lot of that as a consular officer. And some of the jails were, the ones in Spain were obviously nice, the ones in Pakistan were horrendous, and the ones in Nigeria were pretty bad too, jail-wise.
And did they go in the regular population to jail? Like,
yep. Sometimes no. Sometimes, like in Pakistan, for example, they would put the Americans in a special place because they didn't want them to get, like, targeted. But in Nicaragua, no, you were with the general population. And there were about 20 or 30 at that time prisoners that we would go visit. We have to visit them every certain period of time, people in jail. So that's what I would do as a consular officer. I would go to jail and visit American citizens there.
So you made the switch from Nicaragua, went to Pakistan. Again, these were your choices you went there, or is it how much?
So your first two tours, so basically they'll give you a list of places and you rank them in order of where you want to go. I had wanted to go to Pakistan just because, like, you have to, as a foreign service officer, you have to do your time basically in what's called a hardship, like a real hardship post, like in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Pakistan. If you want to be able to rise to the ranks, you have to be able to check that box that you've been in one of those countries before.
What was your game plan when you enter? Was it to go back to private practice, or did you want to rise in state?
No, I wanted to stay at state. I wanted to. I won't be able to do that now, but at the time, I wanted to work in Consular. I wanted to rise in Consular. I wanted to work in DC and work in different countries. And yeah, I wanted to be like, I wanted to go as far as I could in Consular.
I mean, is Consular, but does that then go to like making policies somewhat, or where does that lead to?
As you move up the ranks in the State Department and you move to DC, for example, you could go and make the policies to some extent in Consular itself, or you can like try to be like an ambassador or something too. But my plan had been to stay at state and see what I could do.
How was the mood at state? What year did you leave?
I left March 2018.
Okay, this is fresh.
Recently,
yeah. And what was the mood? Because I know when Tillerson came in, he kind of like chopped off a bunch of state, and like the funding went down 40-50%. It's like crazy amount. What was the mood in state after that kind of stuff came about?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, I think it's fair to say a lot of people were demoralized by the situation. They were demoralized by the Muslim ban. They were demoralized by these threats to cut. The cuts have actually come, but the threats to cut all of our budget. They were demoralized by the fact that ambassadors had not been appointed to places, and
it's still the case right now.
Which is still the case 2 years in. People have been like sort of being patched in to do different things, and so you saw like a huge exodus of officers, and no desire to replace these officers. And so like you're really seeing in state, hundreds of people basically walked out the door and said, no, I'm not going to be able to do this.
Who takes the role of the ambassador, just an acting consul?
So the person is usually the deputy chief of mission, who's the person under the ambassador. And so they basically take on the role of the
a non-political appointee, a career service officer.
Generally, yes.
But does that help kind of people rising up to get that experience, that they're all of a sudden in that position?
Yeah, it does help. Everyone's enacting something these days in state, and so, I have friends still in state, and I tell them, write it out, because when this is all over, you're going to need people to still be in state who are going to rebuild it and make it okay. But I think for a lot of people, that's just not an attainable situation.
Yeah. Plus, you're doing like 80 different. You're supposed to do 40 different jobs, not doing 80 different jobs.
Exactly.
It's because like the funding on state isn't even that much. One of these airplanes that we have is like the funding for the whole State Department. So like, it always caught me like, if we have this plan of kind of dominating the world as the U.S. does, you want to have a State Department that's fully staffed, because it's one of our avenues towards doing this domination. So,
but even before Trump, the State Department has never been really that staffed. The joke in the State Department is that I think the military band is bigger than the entire diplomatic corps. There's like 6,000 or 7,000 members of the military band. There's only like 6,000 diplomats in the world. So we used to joke about, that shows America's priorities, basically. It's like it's always going to be. And you also saw, even during the Obama administration and the Bush administration, a creeping militarism of the State Department, where military people, DOD, and special envoys or czars or whatever, basically were taking over areas that used to be the purview of the State Department.
Wow.
And so even before this age, you saw the whittling of the power, the prestige, and the imprint of the State Department, and that's something that's only being exacerbated now.
That's interesting. I don't know much about the history of State Department. I'll look to do research, but what do you have an idea of when that started happening, where after the Cold War, the State Department's role kind of died down?
After the Cold War, really, even during the Reagan administration, you saw a lot of it, but but basically at the end of the Cold War and the Clinton administration basically stopped hiring Foreign Service officers, so you saw a dearth of officers.
Really?
And then you saw a lot of these special envoys and special czars and the military sort of taking the role of what used to be the State Department. And so, when I was in Nicaragua, and if I had like a quote-unquote contact, that person might be better friends with the military attaché than they would be with a State Department person, and that wasn't the case 50 years ago or whatever. It's really the case now, where if you're in a place like Nicaragua or Nigeria, you probably look at the military people and you're like, well, those guys probably have more pull than the state people.
Wow, that's a whole book right there, about that situation. That's amazing. So I went to Pakistan. How was that processing? So one thing is Nigeria, you have issues of polygamy and stuff that come up. Does that happen in Pakistan as well, where the marriage and divorce don't happen properly, or?
Yeah, that was always a thing in Pakistan. I did mostly American citizen service there, but I would also do the returning resident interviews when I was in Karachi, and I would do some like non-immigrant visa interviews and not immigrant visa interviews, but I would help with the immigrant visa questions.
I'm glad you mentioned the returning resident thing, 'cause everyone's like, what in the world is that? So break down your perspective on even trying to do it and how to do it, all that kind of stuff.
So every country has a different take on the returning resident thing. So basically, because I've done returning resident interviews now, or I did those as a consular officer in all 4 of my posts. And essentially, what you want is, you basically want to be able to show that whatever reason why you stayed abroad is something beyond your control. What that means, it's up to the determination of the consular officer. But also realize that the consular officer can't just make that decision on their own, right? They also have to actually get another officer to sign off on it, right? And so, like, even if you as a consular officer think, oh, this person should get this, visa reinstated, get their IV reinstated. If your manager doesn't agree with you, it doesn't happen. So you actually have to, listen to someone talk and then go talk to your manager about it and say, hey, will you sign off on this as well? Or another officer and say, hey, will you sign off on this?
The officer was kind of sell it because the manager's not going to talk to us.
Exactly.
And how inclined are they?
And so, like, I was always, and I think because I was an immigration lawyer before, I was probably far more sympathetic to these, and I would be far more trying to sell than other officers would. I know most officers I knew were not keen on those at all.
Yeah.
Basically, if it was a medical issue or something that forced you to stay out of the country, I think a lot of us would be sympathetic. But if you bought like a one-way ticket and it's been 5 years and you had the opportunity to travel back and you didn't, those are almost automatic no's. Like if you have like if you bought a one-way ticket to go back to your home country, then no. But if you bought like a two-way ticket and you canceled on it, that would be evidence for an officer that you had the intention of returning to the United States. If you had a house and you were still paying on it, that's something that shows you had the intention to return back to the United States.
What about boarding foils? I think they're cutting that out. I was reading the fan, they updated their stuff about boarding foils when you give it. But how lenient were you in giving those and stuff?
Back in the old days, we were pretty lenient on those. If you lost your green card, we would do everything we could to help you get your boarding foil to go back to the country. But as gradually, nowadays, you have to pay DHS for it. It used to be free in the old days, and I have to pay DHS for it and wait for the interview or whatever for it. But yeah, I was pretty lenient on boarding foils.
Yeah, now you have the I-131A situation payment. Okay.
Yeah.
And one thing we just kind of skipped over is just the whole system of the State Department and decentralization, where any embassy does what it wants, and within that embassy, any chief could do whatever stuff. One thing you talked about last night is the role of managers, and could you talk more about how that works?
So basically, I think a lot of people, they think, oh, I know this post. I understand this post now. Not realizing that as diplomats and foreign service officers, we change every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And so every manager basically wants to put their imprint on their section. And in the State Department, we're incentivized to change things every time we come in, because we have our rating system as officers. So if you want to rise through the ranks of the Foreign Service, you can't just be basically saying everything is the same the 2 years I was there. You want to be able to write something and say, well, I changed this and I changed that. And so, like, even when I was at post, for example, in Nicaragua, when I switched, when one of my bosses left and a new boss came in, one boss was like, well, I don't want any petitioners in the waiting room, ever. And then my next boss was like, well, I want all the petitioners in the waiting room.
So that petitioner waiting room, that's a manager specific? Because like every embassy is different. My clients want to go, they don't.
Not only is every embassy different, the embassy itself can be different, right? And so like people will tell me, well, back 2 years ago, I used to be able to go be a petitioner and go into the embassy. It's like, yeah, because I was a different consular officer and a different manager. And now you have another manager who wants to put their imprint. So when I was in Nigeria, for example, the old IV chief would never talk to the public, right? But then we had a new IV chief, and she instituted this Ask the Consul moment, where you could come to the embassy and ask the immigration visa chief, about the case, and people would yell and scream or whatever, and then people got used to that. And then she left, and the new officer was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to talk to anybody. And so, what you see is that every consular officer manager puts their own imprint on a section. And as lawyers, we're very confused by that, because we're like, well, but when I worked with Paris 2 years ago, they were willing to work with me on this, but now this new officer, doesn't. And so I think that's one thing that, people have to realize is every embassy, not only is every post different, but every embassy is going to be different in 2 or 3 years.
And each officer has a lot of leeway of non-reviewability on their own. And something that was talked about last night is the idea that the manager is going to support their team. So, like, if a consular officer on the line doesn't necessarily make the best decision, they'll stand by their officer as opposed to challenging.
If it's a factual determination and it's a factual issue, 9 times out of 10 we will support each other 1,000%. We might not agree with each other, and we might think that, oh, you know, but we're not going to overturn those. And the other thing is that most people don't realize this, but as consular managers can't overturn the decisions of their officers.
Oh, okay.
They really cannot, unless it's like a legal error. You really cannot do that. And a lot of this is rooted in the fact that, this is actually funny, not funny, but do you remember the underwear bomber? And so, you know, basically he had gotten a denial in Lagos. And then his consular manager basically said, no, this guy has money or whatever, I'm giving him the visa. And then this happened. And after that, you as a consular manager, you would definitely not overturn the decision of your lower.
Yeah, because you know exactly who it was that did it. I had that happen with CBP, because like there's a regular liaison meeting with our local CBP, and they make a point like, the officers who stamped the passports of 9/11 bombers, their numbers on there, they know exactly who it was, and they're like, they can't live with themselves, that kind of stuff. But actually, going back to the security, so I know the amount we talk about security is limited, but like when we had the shootings here in California, it was like a K-1 from Saudi Arabia for a Pakistani person and stuff, and they didn't check. Like, my impression is that, having dealt with a lot of Iranian cases, there's extensive background checks about this consulate. They have access to, you know, CIA, FBI stuff. How do these fall? I'm bordering on conspiracy that some of these even come in, because like the checks are intense, and the officers, they have no inclination just to prove something, just to prove it. It's kind of like they do good checks. I mean, the State Department bears the brunt of accusations of not doing their job, and they need to check more. But you guys check.
Oh yeah, we check so much. Like the amount of checks that we do, especially in countries like Pakistan, are so intense. Like those administrative processing processes are not like, we're not just sitting there doing nothing with those cases. Well, maybe some of us are now, but like back then when I was in Pakistan, like certainly not. Like there was definitely intense background checks, and even in that case, San Bernardino shootings, because I believe that person was linked to Pakistan. You know, I'll say that checks were definitely done on these people, and that no system is infallible. Unfortunately, you're going to get people who unfortunately fall through the cracks in that way. Or maybe that at the time when they were in Pakistan, there was no sign that this person was this way, and it wasn't until they got to the U.S. that
get radicalized in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
And then plus the numbers. What I mean, you deal with 120 interviews a day. You don't have support staff coming in. There's a hiring freeze, and just like there's millions of people doing interviews a year, and there's a small staff. Like it just it puts you in a really squeeze. That's why I really feel bad. Even USCIS and DHS officers, I mean DOS, it's kind of like they bear the brunt of a lot of the chaos of the political supervisors who don't support the funding or support the mission. And it's like then they fall on them the blame in a lot of this stuff. It's really unfair. So like, okay, so you went from Pakistan, then you went to the fun embassy in Spain. How was life in Spain? In Madrid?
I was in Madrid. Life was great in Spain. I loved Spain. I had a great time there.
Did you always go to the embassy and not the consulates, or?
No, I was I've been to 2 consulates, 2 embassies. So I was in the consulate in Karachi and the consulate in Lagos in Pakistan, in Nigeria.
I see.
I went to the embassy in Nicaragua and the embassy in Spain.
Okay, and so Spain was a very interesting time.
Yeah, it was a great time. I was the American Citizen Services chief there, and I would help out with visas sometimes. But yeah, it was a great experience.
What's the difference in the issues that you deal with in Spain as opposed to the previous
obviously, like when you're working with a government that's so helpful to you, like in Spain, the Spanish government was very, very helpful for any kind of issues you would have. There was an open door policy. On the visa side, you saw a lot more third country nationals and a lot of those types of issues. But
how strict were they on third party nationals?
I mean, they would treat them as if they were from the country they were from.
Spain was pretty lenient. I've seen people go there, and up to recently, like years ago, I remember a couple of people just went there, and they're pretty chill about issuing visas. Not so much.
I think that it's always you have to be really careful with anecdotal stories, because again, every officer changes, right?
Yeah,
so like
true.
Maybe like that person got that visa today, but tomorrow or another day, I don't know what would happen. You know? And as visa officers, we overturn each other all the time, or I did. A lot of officers would be very, very hesitant about overturning a decision of another officer. I was not.
How intense are the notes that you take? Are you just typing notes while people are typing?
It depends on the officer. Like, so in some posts, they basically have like a shortcut, basically, where it's just like basically like one sentence or two sentences, and that's it. My notes are always pretty medium. Like, I would try to get, you know, where's this person going, the date they're traveling, their job, their salary, and any prior international travel, right? And so like those are the points that I would try to get in my notes, because I want to make sure that the officers in CBP know what this person told me, but I also want that if they ever interview again, the officer to ask those kind of questions to make sure what they're saying corresponds.
I've been told by CBP how much they love the notes you guys do.
Yeah,
like they wish we could take notes like down the line, but it's just they're just trying to get people in. But when it comes, it's like, oh my god, this is great. Now, regarding notes, so I mean, regarding what something you said is previous travel history. You know, I have Iranian clients who like, we got the Schengen visa, we're going to this. I'm like, that doesn't matter for coming to the U.S. But you're saying maybe Iran's an exception. Are you saying generally they do look at travel history other places?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Like if you are in Nigeria or like a Nigerian, I can tell you that, you know, so you give us the passport. The first thing I do, we're going to flip through that passport, and if that passport is bare and has no international travel, you're probably not going to get the visa. In many instances, we're going to be like, no, because I mean, the thing for us as an officer is, again, the time crunch and the pressure on time is so important that you want to look for data points that make your life easier. Right. And so like, and I'll be honest, I think if you're Iranian, having had a Schengen or UK visa means that they already vetted you and said you're an okay person. That makes the officer feel a lot more comfortable about issuing the visa, right? So like, let's say that you are, like in Nigeria, I can tell you that if you had not traveled before, it'd be incredibly difficult to get a visa from us. Because basically you're asking me in my 2-minute interview with you to take a chance on you, right? In a way that no other embassy has yet taken a chance on you.
Could you see if they've had denials from Europe or embassies like that, or?
It used to be, yeah. And so back in the old days in Nigeria, they would put a stamp, or even our embassy used to do that. We'd put a stamp if you had been denied.
Oh, wow.
And so that way the embassy could tell that, you know, that this person had been denied before. And so the British used to do that. They would put like a stamp saying visa denied in this passport, and you would flip through it, and you'd be like, oh, you got denied a visa at the British embassy, so I'm going to refuse that.
We're going to get a new passport.
Well, that's what I would tell them. Like, you don't want to get a new passport on that one there.
Cool. And then one thing I was talking about last night is congressional inquiries. Are they worth doing or no? And then also, should I have a senator do it or a congressperson do it? Does that make a difference?
You know, what I usually tell people is that, you know, every consular, because we go back to this consular manager, some officers take them really, really seriously and really work hard to make sure they're answered. Others don't give a shit about them. They don't care about them one way or the other, and they don't even show them to their like line officers. You have to respond to them, but sometimes they're like, I don't really care.
There's some sort of statutory thing that they have to respond within this amount of time?
They have to respond within 48 hours. But let's say that you're a consular manager and you just respond with a form letter. They send you a form letter, you send them a form letter right back. So I had managers who did that. But I have had situations where congressionals are really helpful in getting, at least at the very least, making consular officers think twice before they refuse someone, or think twice before they do something in the future. I would say more often than not they are helpful, in my experience.
And is this something that you could do before they come to the interview, or should they wait for that first?
No, I usually would tell people to do it before the interview, because that way you already put it in the officer's head. And sometimes, like at post, and certain managers will actually put a note into the case saying congressional inquiry. And that way an officer already knows, oh, this is a congressional inquiry, I'm going to have to give this interview a little bit more thought than just saying no again. It's especially helpful if you've had someone who's been denied a visa before, and they're going for their second interview. Having that congressional in the notes and in the records, really, so like even before, so what they'll do is they'll get the congressional before the interview, and local staff will put in a note in the system saying this person sent it in the congressional. And as an officer, you see that note and you're like, oh shit, I'm not going to just refuse this one automatically. I'm going to have to give this one some more thought. And generally, I tell people that, you know, if you have the luxury of getting like a congressman and or 2 senators on your board, then great. But chances are only one of them is going to reply. So I tell people, do all 3. Do both your senators and your local congressman, and see which one gets back to you first. And then go that route.
Good to know. Yeah, I'm going to do that one of my cases. I think it's going to be approved, but why not have a double check on it? Yeah. Very interesting. And some things about your perception of people coming to you, some pet peeves that consular officers may have. What are like do not kind of stuff when someone's coming to interview?
Do not ever tell a visa officer that they're doing visa stamping. That is probably the number one pet peeve among.
It's like telling an immigration lawyer that fill out the forms.
Yeah, exactly. Like among consular officers, we absolutely detest when someone's like, "Well, I'm going to go do my visa stamping," because it makes it sound like the officer isn't actually going to do anything with your case, but just like stamp it, right? Like, and we don't stamp anything. So like for us, it's sort of like visa stamping. What the hell is that? So that's probably one of them. The other one would be don't throw documents. As lawyers, we're intentionally trained to think about the documents, and we want to get these documents, but consular officers don't have time for documents. And if the first thing you do at any visa interview, whether IV or NIV, is throw a document at a consular officer, that automatically gets you demerits in that consular's head.
Wow.
Because they're basically like, oh, you're not going to try to talk about this. You're trying to like filibuster me.
Yeah.
And I'm not having that today.
Control the situation, yeah.
So no, I tell people that if you're going to give them documents, you wait for the consular officer to ask you for those documents, or you wait for that moment. But don't try to slide documents in them instantly. Don't be very, very specific when the consular officer asks. Because again, the consular officer has so much pressure to do 150 interviews. Yeah. You only have 2 minutes to do this. If I ask you, what are you doing? And you're like, business.
Yeah.
Or where are you traveling to? I'm going to America. It's like, I know you're going to America.
Yeah. I know that you do call me too. I'm like, where are you calling from? They're like, California. I'm like, what's a big state? Like, where in California?
Yeah.
I'm in Los Angeles. Are you here?
So if you're like training, if you're helping do a mock interview or whatever, you make sure they're being as specific as possible. And with the mock interview, tell them that they should just know what's on the paper.
Yeah.
Don't think that the officer is going to sit there and read this paper, or an invitation letter or anything like that. Don't think the consular officer is going to do
an invitation letter is one thing that's like people will call me, especially from Iran. I'm like, there's really no such thing as an invitation. It's worthless unless it's a business need or like some sort of more official kind of situation.
If it's like a business situation or like a Schlumberger or some big company or Google or Apple or something, send that letter, send that bad boy, because that'll help you a lot. But if it's just like, oh, I want to invite my uncle to come stay with me, no, don't do that.
What about for a B1, B2, or B2, having an I-134, is that needed, not needed for the affidavit support for tourist visa?
For tourist visa, no. No, it does nothing for the officer. Again, the officer doesn't have time to deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you are too broke to travel on your own, you're just not going to get the visa. That's just ultimately the truth, right? As a consular officer, it's like as a consular officer, if someone gave me like a I-384, like for a B1, B2, I'd refuse them, because I'd be like, obviously you can't afford this travel because you have someone from America paying for your travel, so you don't have any ties to this country to keep you here. So I'm going to actually use that to refuse you, and as evidence of why I'm refusing you.
Yeah. It's like people have a lot of relatives here. I'm like, that doesn't say help you. It's like more chance that you're going to come here and have the wherewithal to stay or the situation to stay.
Or even like, let's say that you have a relative who overstayed. Or if you're going to visit that relative, I'm like, dude, do not, if that's where you're going, just so you know, as a consular officer, I'm going to look up that relative. And I can see if that relative has overstayed or if that relative didn't use their visa correctly. And the minute I see that, I'm going to refuse you, because I'm like, you're going to do the same exact thing that relative did to stay over there.
Now, even before Trump came, they started rolling out, I think it started before him, but DS-5535, the supplemental information.
Yeah. Extreme vetting and everything else.
Yeah. Was that just put on officers all of a sudden, like, do this, and then what do you guys do with that? Is there something internally you want to have all that extra information, or?
I think that, I don't know how much I can go into details about it, but certainly officers use that to make a determination about whether there's a need for further checks on an applicant.
To the extent you can answer, is that something the officer makes a decision whether they want it, or is that something the computer tells them, get it from this person? Because I get it from all Iranians, but I had a Brazilian case where they want to ask it too. And it was just a guy who was a businessman.
It's all over the world now.
Yeah.
It's all over the world now. In Spain, we did a lot of those too, and all over the world, I know, as far as I know, we do a lot of those now.
It's just probably going to be standard practice eventually for everything.
Yeah, and basically, you want to get a list of questions, and you're like, oh, okay, so these points are something that raise red flags to me, and I believe that they should go.
Now, when they ask, like, travel history 15 years, and people are, like, kind of vague, how strict are they about the days? Like, it just depends.
I don't think that, as far as I remember, like, many of us weren't particularly strict about the dates. Like, some officers are going to be a lot more strict than others, but...
What about like a DS-260 when, like, you don't remember the months and you just say June on everything, or like...
it's fine. Okay. It's fine. No officers are going to, like, well... I would say that most officers I've worked with have never been like pretty strict on the dates. But I think that a lot of people stress out about the DS-260 not focusing on what the officer probably cares about. Because I've had a lot of clients even tell me, oh my God, I don't know what to mark for this or that. I'm like, they don't care about that stuff. What they care about as an officer is you want to see what their salary range is, are they married or single, and have they traveled ever before? And also whether you mark yes on any of those like questions, because if you mark yes on any of those like the ugly questions, a red thing pops up among the officers, right? It's like if you mark yes, I've been arrested before, or yes, I overstayed before, a giant red flag pops up for the officer during the visa interview, and it's like, oh, I know what to ask you about.
Interesting. So, and then you were there when the travel ban's instituted. Did you have to deal with cases that were from the banned country? Because you were in Spain at that time.
Yeah, I was in Spain at that time. There were a lot of people from, the embassy itself. I mean, within the State Department, there was a big battle among officers about how to react to the travel ban. I wrote this op-ed for the LA Times, but I talked a lot about this. Basically we're officers. 1,000 of us got together and we signed on to this dissent cable saying that we don't believe that this is the way to keep America safe. And then a lot of us, as time went on, said, okay, well, we're going to make this work. And others of us didn't. And so, yeah, there were officers in Spain who were affected and had to enforce the travel ban. And others, that's just the way it was. And for me, it just became, it's not like I was affected by the travel ban, but I remember what the president said in December 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown, where he was like, I want a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering this country, right? And then Donald Trump is many things, but he's also a man of his word. And so it's like, well, the man said he wanted to do this. And now we're pretending like he never said those things before. And that's fine. I think that there has to be a lot of us in State Department and in government who have to pretend, but there has to be some of us who don't pretend. And I think that I have to be one of those who just can't
What
pretend.
was the final straw that caused you to leave State?
It was probably the shithole comment. The comment about the African countries being shitholes or whatever, and sort of the lack of reaction from within State about it. I think it was that, the Muslim ban, a combination of all this stuff, where I just realized that for me personally, that there is no fighting the system within the system. There's no fight. The State Department is what it is. They're not going to push back on this. They already tried to push back on it, and then we all just sort of gave up on it. And so I felt that I had to make my voice heard, and the only way to do that was to be on the outside.
And you wrote a great op-ed. That's how I learned about you and reached out. I studied political science in college, and the idea was go to politics, and then later maybe go be a prosecutor, and then try to change the system from the inside. That was my belief. Then I realized, you don't dance with the devil dances with you. And so, if you go and try to dance with them, they're going to dominate you and change you. Even if Trump wanted to drain the swamp, there's so much wickedness there, it's going to suck you in, and you can't change that system. The only thing you can do is change yourself and try to live. You're to help people on the outside. And that's why, the idea of going to government or in various fashions, it was let's stop.
I always tell the story about when I used to be in the State Department. So I wrote a book about the civil rights movement.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I know you wrote a book. I got to read it. I would have didn't do that.
No,
Sorry,
it's more like a dictionary / encyclopedia about the American civil rights movement.
What's the name of the book?
The Historical Dictionary of the Civil Rights Movement. And so one thing that I researched a lot was the State Department and its role in the American civil rights movement. And so one of the first officers who was ever selected to be a State Department officer was in the 1950s. And so he had to go train in Virginia. But Virginia was a segregated place then. So our training facility at that time was segregated. So the black officer, Todd basically, had to enter the, it wasn't integrated. And so the cafeteria at that time was segregated and wouldn't allow the black officer to come in. And so half the consular officers or half the visa officers or State Department officers were like, well, we want to eat with Todd. We want to integrate the cafeteria. The other half were like, no, we don't want to integrate. We don't want Todd. Todd's a nice guy, but he's black. This is the law. And so what State Department did is they split the cafeteria and they made one half who wants to eat with Todd can eat with Todd and be integrated, and the other half that wants to be white only, they can do that. And that in a nutshell is the State Department. The State Department, it doesn't matter what situation you're in or what kind of environment you reside in, the State Department is always going to try to find, and that's what we're trained to do. That's what we are hired. That's the reason why we're hired, is because we always try to find the middle ground on any subject or any topic, right? And so for us, the Muslim ban is no different than what we did to Terrence Todman back in the 1950s, where we basically said, well, it's discrimination, but at least we're trying, right? At least we're trying to make it half discrimination. At least we're trying to not make it that bad a discrimination. And that's what the State Department does for everything. And that's what it's been doing all of its history.
So it's not going to come out and make a stand and try to change things. It's just trying to negotiate a settlement kind of.
And I get that, and that's fine. And I'm glad that there are people in there who are doing their best to make it not as miserable. But again, you need people who are in there and on the outside now basically saying, I know what you're doing, and you know what you're doing, and it's good that I'm at least telling you what you're doing.
Yeah.
In the hope that when this is all over, you can go back to undoing all of those things.
How hard is it to undo these things? One state has a policy and they have a DS260. Went from DS230 that was 4 pages to a DS260 that's all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just one-way street kind of.
I think that what you're going to need is, the one thing I admire about President Trump is that he has totally rethought the way government should work in a way, right? I don't think that people in state or even during the Obama administration really thought of immigration or government as a tool to help people in the way that Trump has thought of government as a way to harm people. And so really, if you ever get another Republican president or a Democratic president, that person is going to have to come in and be like, okay, so not only am I going to repeal all of these things on day one, but I'm going to make a system whereby we are going to put so many horcruxes and so many checkpoints in government that no one can ever do something like this again. And I think that that's what I would be looking for in a presidential candidate, is somebody who's going to say, okay, so you have this Muslim ban, but just undoing the Muslim ban is going to do more than just that. Because that's going to take time to undo that, but you're going to need to create a system in a government whereby the next Donald Trump Jr. can't come in there and be like, well, I'm going to reinstitute the Muslim ban and make it twice as bad.
Yeah.
You want to put as many checkpoints in there to stop it.
I mean, that's going to be somebody who wants to give away power, an executive that's going to give away power. That's just not the nature. We look at Thomas Jefferson. He was always about limited government, but as soon as he got in there, he started doing some stuff too. John Adams.
Louisiana Purchase being a perfect example.
Yeah. John Adams was the founding father. He did the Alien Sedition Act. So it's kind of once you're in that seat, all of a sudden, you don't want to give up power. And then another thing is the politics of even if you're against travel ban, once you're in power, to undo it makes you sound like you're weak on national security. And it's just a political point to lose or something.
But I think that that's why it's important that, I don't call it the travel ban, for example. I call it the Muslim ban, because that's what the president wanted to do. I think that, I would want any person who promises to be president that the first thing that they do is to undo this. And that they set up, I don't even want a committee. I just want them to be like, you know what, this came in on an executive order, you can undo it on an executive order. Because there's no rational basis for this travel ban. This isn't rooted in any kind of security. This is rooted in the president's discriminatory animus.
Guantanamo was like this too. I mean, Obama first thing said to get rid of it, and he couldn't. He got too much pushback.
Right. He needed Congress for that, right?
You don't Guantanamo? I think it was I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I mean, but Congress basically passed something where he couldn't basically get rid of it, right? And so Congress basically stepped up and said, no, we're going to let you get rid of that. I don't think you're going to have that problem with the travel ban. I don't think
as the commander-in-chief, you're the head general, so you can, but I mean, it's I guess he didn't want to lose points. It just, his political capital is I'm not going to fight this one.
Right.
He tried to, I think, just let him go to a certain extent here and there,
go here and there, but that's another battle that we've sort of all given up on. But just because it's difficult, I just don't believe it's something we can, because I think for me, it isn't that, look, I think that if you're Iranian or Yemeni or Syrian, especially if you're Iranian, even before the travel ban, it wasn't easy to get a visa.
Yeah.
You always had these long waits, right? It was always a difficult situation. But I think with the travel ban, you have a president that has rooted his discriminatory animus toward people of the Islamic faith by targeting basically the weakest countries without a constituency that he could possibly find. And so for me, I would want a president and a Congress to ask the tough questions about how this came about. I mean, when the travel ban came out, it was supposed to be for 180 days, right? It's supposed to be studied every 180 days and renewed or whatever. There's no talk of renew. There's no talk of that anymore, right? You're supposed to have a form. DHS and the State Department were supposed to get together and create a form to help people understand it. None of that stuff is happening.
It's kind of set up for failure because they said the countries have to again do an information sharing with the U.S. and Iran's not going to do information sharing with the U.S. So it's it's already set for failure. Yeah,
and that was the intention of it was to do that. And again, look, if this was rooted in any kind of actual security measures. If any of these, if Iranians and Yemenis and Syrians were, attacking and killing people in America, but like today, for example, I read that Saudi Arabia gave financing to like Al-Qaeda affiliated groups in Yemen. And it's like, well, I don't see Saudi Arabia on that travel ban, right?
And then there's these kids that are like committing crimes, and Saudi Arabia sends a jet and then pays off their bail and sends it back. But
exactly.
It's just like that's 15 out of 19 terrorist hijackers from there, from Pakistan. Right. So it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
My view is it's an attack on Iran, because the countries on the travel ban started Obama's time. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a prerequisite to starting war with Iran, because pretty much travel ban is dominantly Iran focused. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think Yemenis, the travel ban, you can get B1, B2 visas. Oh no, it only stops B1, B2s for Yemenis, not L1s, because I had L1 Yemenis clients, surprisingly, but. And I was like, don't leave, you can't. He did change his status, and he wanted to go get the visa so he could travel. I'm like, don't. Then after 6 months, I looked, I'm like, oh wait, the Yemenis is only a B1, B2 thing. But I'm like, still don't go, because there's that process, they don't even breast yet. You never, the L1, you never know, you go there to change things up.
Cato Institute did a study that showed that the people primarily affected by the travel ban among immigrant visas are Yemenis.
Really?
That Yemenis are the ones that are like 57%, I think Cato said, separated from their spouse or parent in the U.S. And so the travel ban does affect people who are immigrant visa applicants. I mean, they'll eventually get their waiver someday, but that wasn't the way the waiver process was intentioned.
What is your perspective on how to handle the waiver process as immigration attorney? Because I've seen people from Syria and Yemen and stuff, they would get packets and they would accept it up to a certain time. Recently that stopped. Iranians, at the beginning, some would accept, some now it's just like Abu Dhabi, Ankara, Iran, like don't even give us paperwork.
Yeah.
What do you think about all that?
I think that you should go in with a pitch. You should go in trying to sell yourself as someone who's deserving of this waiver, unfortunately, until that day is over. And so you should go in with the paperwork if necessary, but again, the officer's not going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
But you want to sell yourself not only to the officer, but you want to sell it in a way that this officer really has sympathy for you and is willing to fight for you. And that's what you have to do. Every case is going to be tough. Officer's not going to fight for every case, but you want to make your case that one the officer fights for.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's going to be difficult.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how much attention do you guys pay about form shopping? And like, so if someone says, I'm in Germany or Spain because I'm on a tour, and I thought, oh, I'll just do my embassy interview here too, as opposed to the one they're supposed to. I guess pretty much for NIVs. How suspicious would you get, or some of your colleagues?
It used to be that we were pretty suspicious of forum shopping, but I think now because of all the chaos in the world, it's become a lot more accepted that, if you're like from this country, you can interview in our country. It used to be a lot, like I remember the UK for a time would refuse all Nigerians who tried to interview in the UK and tell them, well, I don't know the country conditions of Nigeria, so go back to interview in Nigeria. And we sort of they moved away from that as a State Department. But yeah, look, if you got denied a visa in X country and you're trying to interview in Y country, that's just not going to work.
Well, so the first step, you got to go to the right place.
Yep. So I think that you should go to the right place the first time around. Yeah. But if you're got denied a visa in one country, we know exactly what you're doing if you try to go to another country. Sometimes that works, but chances are most of the time it's not going to work if you try to form shop like that.
Well, thanks so much.
But I take that back for some countries, like let's say that you are Chinese and you want to go down to Mexico or Canada. That is more accepted. Even if you have been denied a visa before in one of those faraway countries, officers in Mexico and Canada are much more understanding of that.
Yeah. Oh, good to know. I mean, the third-party TCN processing in Mexico is kind of crazy. Like, I want to send my L1s there faster, but you can't do initial visa. There's all these requirements. And then Canada, I'm always wondering if they're going to be strict or not, or about that. And it's kind of weird.
The people who run Canada are pretty strong. That they're really good consular officers, and they're really good at their jobs. And so I wouldn't discourage anyone from going to Canada.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries.
What's the best way someone could contact you if they have questions, just want to reach out?
The best way is my email address, chris.richardson@nelsonmullins.com.
Do you have any social media handles or anything like that?
No, not really.
Well, good. Thank you so much for coming today. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.